truly my pleasure to welcome you to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's 2021 Virtual Annual Legislative Conference. Thank you so much for participating and watching today's panel discussion titled The Democratization of United States Foreign Policy, How Diversity Can Shape U.S. Engagement Throughout the World. The murder of Mr. George Floyd at the outset of the pandemic garnered international attention and sparked a wave of global protests. Tens of thousands of people from Sydney, Australia, to Paris, France, to Nairobi, Kenya, marched in solidarity with Americans protesting the racial injustice and police brutality regularly experienced by our Black and brown communities. The world was transfixed by the social unrest in the United States, precipitated by hundreds of years of systemic oppression. In focusing on U.S. domestic instability caused by racial inequities, other international communities began to recognize and vocally protest similar conditions for their Black and brown and other minority populations. Mr. George Floyd's brutal death was a catalyst for national conversations about racial and social injustice. The United States was foisted on the global stage for domestic unrest. Today, this panel is going to make clear the connection between domestic and international movements and how the United States can navigate these issues by diversifying its foreign policy workforce and also by shining some light on the unfinished business of racial justice in America. Before finishing my opening remarks, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists, Nicole Austin Hillary, Misha Thompson, and Aaron Brown. Our panelists have been engaged in the fight for racial equity and the advancement of human rights both here and abroad for many years. Their experience and perspectives are so important and valuable and will help us chart the way forward on diversifying our foreign policy workforce. And thank you to our phenomenal moderator, my good friend April Ryan, for all of the work that she has done and continues to do to elevate the needs and the issues of the African American community. You can guarantee that April will always hold the political establishment and institutions accountable on how they incorporate the perspective of African Americans. The export of the United States founded civil rights movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and Occupy Wall Street demonstrates that our struggles here are not wholly unique to the United States. There are real parallels between the fight for civil rights here and the fight for human rights abroad. Inequality is at the heart of every crisis we're dealing with right now. The crisis of police brutality, the COVID-19 public health crisis, which is disproportionately affecting the Black community and communities of color, and, of course, developing nations. The crisis of poverty and extreme poverty, excluding so many families and children from a good quality of life, and the crisis of voting rights and election administration. The U.S. cannot be absent in global dialogue or turn a blind eye to our own struggles on the world stage. Unfortunately, the lack of diversity in our foreign policy workforce lends to the United States complacency and hypocrisy as we champion the benefits and value of democracy around the world, including the importance of fair and free elections. As the first African American chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, I am responsible for allocating over $62 billion in funding to our nation's diplomatic and development institutions. And yes, I prioritize funding initiatives to fight the effects of systemic racism in our foreign policy. Specifically, I am working to ensure our nation's diplomatic and development workforce reflects the diversity of the American people, as well as the contracts that are let by our international agencies. For far too long, people of color have had a limited voice and limited opportunities to shape our country's foreign policy. The chronic and entrenched lack of diversity and inclusion is well known and causes many challenges for our nation at home and abroad. Lack of diversity among our workforce can lead to whole classes of issues, including systemic racism, poverty, inequality, climate justice being ignored. In addition, I'm also working to center the issue of racism and the effects of white supremacy in our foreign policy decision-making. I have advocated for the United States to restore its leadership on the world stage by reflecting its own values of democracy, equality, and civil rights right here at home. As a result, recently, the United States invited United Nations Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism and the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues to examine systemic racism in American law enforcement. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, and I quote, "Responsible nations must not shrink from scrutiny of their own human rights records. Rather, they should acknowledge it with the intent to improve." Inviting outside criticism of ourselves is a crucial step towards dismantling systemic racism in the United States and goes a heck of a long way to restoring our credibility on the global stage. I have long been a champion for creating more opportunities for African Americans in our foreign policy workforce. When people abroad see the uniformity of our diplomatic corps, they question our commitment to inclusion. And when Americans of color don't see their priorities acknowledged, they feel alienated by their own government. When we see fewer opportunities to shape foreign policy, they are less likely to engage in shaping foreign policy, and yes, in politics generally. So the struggle for civil rights opens the door for more engagement with the broader international community by African Americans. It can be a catalyst to diversifying the United States foreign policy space. I am totally committed to advancing real, impactful solutions to address these entrenched institutional barriers to diversity. It is way past time to enact bold, forward-leaning policy solutions that include racial equity and racial justice. We're now going to hear from the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, a good friend of mine, Samantha Power.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to speak to you today at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's 50th Annual Legislative Conference. It was 50 years ago that Dr. Samuel Adams, USAID's first Black assistant administrator, testified before Congress to defend America's support to Africa on the Hill. Dr. Adams, the son of a chauffeur who earned his PhD from the University of Chicago, by then had a storied career as a development professional. After working to pay his way through college and serving during World War II, he joined the Economic Cooperation Administration, USAID's predecessor. He was an education advisor in what was then Indochina, followed by stints in Nigeria, a newly independent Mali, the Ivory Coast, Liberia, and Morocco. He was eventually named ambassador to Niger before returning to USAID to direct all of our Africa programs. But in testifying, he had to face down one of the US Congress's biggest opponents to foreign assistance, Representative Otto Passman of Louisiana. Upon laying eyes on Dr. Adams and realizing he was Black, Passman did a double take. He then gathered himself and said, "Welcome, Reverend. I look forward to these budget hearings." For the next 6 hours, Passman would address Dr. Adams as Reverend, the familiar Jim Crow tactic used to avoid calling Black men doctor, ambassador, or even mister. But Dr. Adams bit his lip, as so many Black people have had and still have to do, and defended USAID's investments in Africa, vaccinating children against smallpox and measles, building schools, ushering in the green revolution across the continent, and responding to droughts and disasters. He excelled during the briefing and refuted Passman's arguments one by one. And together with congressional allies, including the 13 founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus, he successfully defended the budget for foreign assistance in Africa. Over the last 50 years, the CBC membership has increased fourfold, and today it continues to be a leading voice for the worth and necessity of American foreign assistance. Just as the caucus has served as America's conscience here at home, so too have you advocated on behalf of the people most in need around the world. But you've also advocated for America's foreign engagement to actually reflect America, our values, our character, our diversity. The global challenges we face today, from COVID to climate change to the growing specter of autocracy, are as grave and complex and multifaceted as any we have faced in American history. And while there is no challenge America can't solve, there are many challenges we can't solve without fresh ideas, diverse thinking, and perspectives that reflect the lived experiences of all Americans, particularly African Americans. Yet when we turn the mirror back on ourselves, we see a structure at USAID that doesn't reflect the diversity we rightfully prize and need. Although nearly 33% of our permanent direct hires identify as Black or African American, the majority of them serve in support functions and in less senior roles. Black employees make up nearly half of our administrative management services staff and are underrepresented in the senior executive and senior foreign service. Black women, especially so. A majority of our Black foreign service officers occupy lower ranks, and a recent GAO study found that racial and ethnic minority civil service staff were 31 to 41% less likely to be promoted than their white counterparts. USAID's ability to fully advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programming and our partnerships will rely on our ability to increase diversity in our workforce and to create a culture in which minority employees can thrive and advance. I signaled my commitment to this effort on my first day as administrator when I signed USAID's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan. But as we know, a plan is just a plan. Now we must move beyond commitment and to action and assemble the infrastructure necessary to integrate DEI into USAID's core values, policies, and operations, and ensure we are creating an environment where our underrepresented employees can in fact thrive. To improve our pipeline of diverse candidates, we are expanding our outreach to minority-serving institutions. This month, in fact, USAID is hosting its first ever annual Historically Black College and University Development Conference, which will highlight panel discussions, networking sessions, and skill-building workshops to raise awareness of USAID's work and showcase employment opportunities with the agency. We are also increasing our support for entry programs that attract candidates from underrepresented groups. Over the coming years, for example, we plan to double the number of Donald M. Payne Fellowships in partnership with Howard University to diversify the ranks of USAID's foreign service. To strengthen our culture, we are hiring advisors in all of our bureaus and offices across the agency to focus specifically on DEI. We're also introducing mandatory DEI training for all staff and new hires and building out our training curriculum to include tailored courses on unconscious bias, microaggressions, and cultural competency. And to support and retain our diverse talent, we are strengthening opportunities for their growth and professional development. We plan to increase our support for the International Career Advancement Program by 150% next year to build the skills of our staff from groups, again, traditionally underrepresented in foreign policy. These efforts align with the Biden-Harris administration's goals to bring critical perspectives and talents into the national security workforce. We must finally move past the good intentions and actually recruit and nurture diplomats and development experts who reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of our country. We have to show the best of who we are as Americans and demonstrate that we are living the values of equity and dignity that we seek to advance around the world. Thank you so much.
I would like to now turn it over to our excellent moderator, April Ryan. She is a Washington, D.C. bureau chief and White House correspondent on The Grill. She has been featured in Essence, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and Elle magazines, to name a few. She is an acclaimed author and journalist. April, to you, I thank you and look forward to your doing all this heavy lifting today. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It is such an honor to be the moderator for this esteemed panel today. With us are a group of people who are from the sectors of public policy, civil rights, as well as human rights. And we're going to take a deep dive into this title and theme: Democratization of U.S. Foreign Policy, How Diversity Can Shape U.S. Engagement Throughout the World. And the panel will explore how the U.S. approaches international relationships and relations through defense, diplomacy, and development. And the panel is a combination, as I said, of U.S. civil rights leaders who have founded and participated in global movements and established U.S. policy. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. Our panel, first person on the panel, Nicole Austin Hillary, Executive Director of the U.S. Program on Human Rights Watch. Dr. Misha Thompson, Director of Global Partnerships Policy and Innovation Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and Erin Brown, Interim Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Coordinator at USAID. Ladies, thank you so much. This is ladies first, right? I love that. I love that. Well, welcome. We are looking at so much in the news, you know, as a White House correspondent and Washington Bureau Chief of the GRIO, my focus is on everything that involves the President of the United States. And right now, the President of the United States is involved with issues of Haiti, issues involving Tigray, issues involving South Africa, domestically, issues involving Black Lives Matter, issues involving voting rights, issues of equity across the board, and immigration that involves us as people. And with that said, I want to go to the first question. And ladies, whoever wants to jump in, please do. What are the parallels between the fight for civil rights here in the United States and the fight for human rights abroad? A lot of people are asking that. And it seems like there are some parallels. And Nicole, it looks like you want to answer. Give us your understanding of these parallels.
April, first of all, thank you for that important question. And I was anxious to jump in first because I will tell you that when I took over as executive director of the U.S. Program of Human Rights Watch, one of the questions I got from colleagues in the traditional civil rights community was, are you now going to leave civil rights behind? And every time, April, I would get that question, I would cringe. That was like nails on a chalkboard to me. Because it's so crucially important for people to understand that human rights and civil rights are inextricably linked, and that one movement actually begat the other. And it is a fallacy for people to think about those movements as siloed. We have a history in the United States of people fighting for voting rights, housing rights, education, water rights, women's rights, under the auspices of the human rights banner. And people need to understand that when we're talking about all of those issues, while we traditionally in the United States think of those as civil rights issues, those are human rights issues. The UN Declaration on Human Rights speaks to these issues. It speaks to voting rights. It speaks to water rights. So I think we have to begin this conversation with everyone having that understanding and realizing that as we fight to protect these rights and as we fight back against so many of these issues that you just articulated, April, that we do so under the banner of human and civil rights being linked and being one. And I think that's what's going to make our efforts and our impact that much more powerful.
So to the rest of our panel, if human rights and civil rights are linked, how do we as a country go to other countries and talk about their human rights issues when we clearly have issues that have dated back since the inception of this country? Civil rights, you know, I guess we can start 402 years ago plus when we were brought into this nation, enslaved Africans into this nation. Dr. Thompson, I want to go to you first.
Well, thank you for that question. I would also like to thank Chairwoman Barbara Lee for having me here today with such a distinguished group of panelists. And I wanted to actually, I think, say a couple of things also in response to your first question. So I have often gotten this question about, in part because I am in a global career at this point, yes, and African American. And really this question of we have so many problems and things that are happening here, how is it that you can focus on things abroad? I will say that the commission that I work with, the U.S. Helsinki Commission, focuses on 57 countries. So it includes our country, it includes the United States, Canada, as well as countries all across Europe. And in that role, what you see is a lot of the same issues that we have here. I think, as Nicole indicated, we also have abroad. One of the other things that I've come to learn is there are also people of African descent across the world. So 200 million in South America, 20 million I'm currently working with on issues that are residing in Europe. And that's in addition to many other diverse, vulnerable people of color across the world. And so one of the things that we do find around these issues around civil and human rights are issues of race are often embedded because of colonial transatlantic slave trade and other histories that are also shared around the world. So I did just kind of want to, also jump in and say that when we are focused on things, civil rights here, a number of the policies and responses that we try to incorporate here at home are not only watched abroad by those diverse populations that share some of our common struggles and histories, but in many times they're also utilized abroad. And I have to say that in this role, I have also learned that there are solutions that are taking place abroad that we could also be utilizing here. And so it is becoming a very shared conversation in terms of how we move all of our democracies forward.
So, Dr. Thompson, I want you to hold on to those solutions because that is important. We like to talk a lot and we like to hear ourselves talk sometimes, but I like the conversation and the talk when we talk about solutions, actionable things that really can make a difference, not just these, I guess, high overarching, broad brush things. People like to say, oh, I think the world is great if we just love. Well, how do we love? Let's get into the weeds of how do we love? Those are the kinds of things I think that we need at this moment. And with that said, Erin, I want to go to our posture. What does it look like for Paris or Canada or somewhere maybe even in the Ukraine when they see tanks and National Guard in the street against Americans? I'm not talking just a broad brush, but Americans that are fighting to fix what's broken. What does that send to the? And I'm clearly not saying the word Black. I'm saying Americans, and I think that is important because a lot of times when people from overseas look at America and think of America, they don't think about us. They don't think about people of color here, because that's not the picture, but they've seen this picture, but they don't really realize that we're full-fledged Americans who are taxpayers, who vote and uplift and have built this nation. What is America's posture, or what do we look like? What is our posture looking like for those overseas who see the tanks, the National Guard, the anger, the angst?
Thank you so much for that question, April. And I too wanted to thank Congresswoman Lee for inviting me to serve on this panel. So here's where we are. Bottom line up front, we have a credibility problem, right? We have a problem. We don't have street cred when it comes to where we stand on human rights. And I think it is through our own right, through our own record on civil rights and human rights. And so we're talking about issues such as police brutality, de jure de facto mistreatment of Black people. We are not able to substantiate our moral leadership globally through evidence, right? We are not able to substantiate our values in theory as values in truth. So there's a dissonance between those values. It leads to a schism between what we say should be done versus what we actually do. And so what that ultimately means is that we promote ideals with which we have very little experience. And so the myths that we tell ourselves about the American origin story and who we are as Americans is a narrative that has been pushed to shape American values within our country and throughout the world, but does not reflect the full truth. And so as long as that misalignment exists, we will minimize our ability to be as impactful as we could be in advancing human rights abroad.
That was powerful. That misalignment is, it's not just this moment. That misalignment has been going on for a long time, and it's been covered up. And what's done in the dark comes to the light, right? And I think there's a bright light that's shining on all of the imperfections, if you will, all the scabs or the oozing infections that have not scabbed over as of yet. Nicole, Aaron talked about our street cred. Our street cred. I know I like that. It's
do
true.
too.
Yeah. How do we go to Haiti and try to fix the brokenness there that is, we don't even know how they can hold elections in September with gangs overrunning and assassins just going into the palace and killing the president of Haiti. No one stops them. How do we go in and fix that after we had January 6th? Hello. Street cred, right, Aaron? How do we go to South Africa? How do we go to Tigray when our street cred is so bad?
You know, April, it's very basic, which is like with any kind of issue where people have to come clean, if you will. That's what the United States has to do. I deal so often at Human Rights Watch with people accusing us of what they call American exceptionalism. Because as we've already said in this conversation, we often approach situations and contexts and conversations as though we are exceptional, as though we do it best, and as though we know best and we do it well, and as though we are the ones who can direct everyone else as to how they do it. We have to come to these tables, April 1st, admitting that we get a lot of things wrong and that we've gotten a lot wrong, and that January 6th was an atrocious attack on democracy. We have to admit that the history of race and racism in this country is something that we have not contended with and that we must face up to it. We have to come clean with these other nations that we are trying to work with and for whom we are to be an example. That has to be the starting point. And then it needs to really, April, be a conversation of mutuality, if you will, where we are talking about how can we help one another. As one of the panelists said earlier, there are things, and I know you're going to get to this, April, but there are things going on in other nations, solutions that are being utilized that we can learn from and that perhaps we need to consider adopting in the United States. That needs to be our approach around these tables, April. Admitting what our problems are, admitting that we don't always get it right, and also acknowledging that we have something to learn from other nations and admitting that mutuality has to be a starting point when we're talking about diplomacy and when we're talking about problem solving.
So Nicole, you went to solutions when I said we were going to wait a little bit, but that's okay. I like it. We went to solutions. But I think about the testimony on the Hill for the January 6th Select Committee with those African-American police officers who were police officers who happened to be Black. When they said under oath that one of them said, the insurrectionists, the rioters, the thugs, et cetera, whatever nasty, dirty words you want to call them, we will make that apply. They said, who did you vote for? And when he said he voted for Biden, they called him the N-I-G-G-E-R word, the N word. And then they said it was a different story for Black police officers who were fighting that day versus the other police officers. It was very racial. And when you talked about solutions, Nicole, I could not help but think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa after apartheid. But, there are people who say a lot of these commissions, they really do nothing. They just kick the can down the road. Dr. Thompson, I want to ask you, is that a piece? Do we need, because we've been told by people under oath, but people still don't get it. We are a nation, the United States of America, that sees lynchings every day by racists and at the hands of policing organizations. And yet there's still no federal anti-lynching law in this nation. So do we need a commission? Do we need a commission to tell us what we already know? Dr. Thompson, yes.
I would just like to start by saying it is doable. It is doable for us to address historic injustices so that not only our nation can move forward, other nations can move forward. There are a number of examples of this. Chairwoman Barbara Lee in particular actually has a bill that she has put out on that is focused on truth, racial healing. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting bill in the sense that it does not make the assumption that the United States started as a unified country and that we're working in a sense towards reconciliation. It actually talks about the fact that we need to heal. So we need to focus on racial healing. So that is one of the bills that is currently moving through Congress now. Dr. Gail Christopher in particular has been one of the, I would say, just great minds that has helped to push that forward. And she's also someone that participated in an event that we actually did at the Helsinki Commission a few years ago. That included 5 panelists, all from different nations. And so one of those nations was from the Netherlands. And for those who are paying attention, on July 1st, the mayor of Amsterdam actually issued an apology for the wealth that the city of Amsterdam had built based upon slavery. There was another panelist, Tracy Tanzia Bibo from Belgium, who was helping to do research on reparations that the Belgian government could actually pay back to the DRC. There was another gentleman who actually focused on the tragedies experienced by Jewish communities during the Holocaust and who had spent his entire career working around the world to ensure that there was restitution for those people. And then there was another woman from the Balkans who actually focused on the ethnic conflict that had taken place there and all of those solutions. So not only, I think, is this doable, there are many paths to get there. But I think the point is we are not going to heal. We are not going to move past January 6th or any of these other moments of division if we really can't think about, one, not only how we come to terms with our past, but really what we want the future of this nation to look like. And if we are going to actually implement the rights, protections, and opportunities that are enshrined in our Constitution.
So what you're saying is basically HR 40, this reparations study that is the crux of HR 40, it's on par with what's happening around the world, correct? Is that what you're saying, Dr. Thompson? And Congresswoman Lee, what she's doing, the healing.
So I would say yes and no in the sense that if you look historically, those pieces of legislation have actually been around for close to 4 decades. I think the fact that we actually had a congressional hearing this year suggests that we are in a different point in time where our country may be at a point where we can start to have these conversations. But what is very important about Chairwoman Lee's bill is that it explicitly states that there is a need for racial healing. We are going to have to look at our past and how it continues to impact people today if we are going to move forward. And that focuses on race. So we have to have the conversation. It's not about, it's not going to be just about economics. It's not going to be about schools. It's not going to be about housing. All of race is embedded in all of those things, given our history. And so that is just a very explicit, I think, component that is there. And then the reparations, the HR 40, the reparations bill actually requires a study so that we understand that if there is going to be restitution, what that restitution would actually look like. And I'm not going to get into all of, I think, the diverse conversations, because I think one of the things that I tried to say in the beginning are there are many ways to get to these points of healing. And people are doing it different ways. So some countries are going for reparations, others are looking at apologies, and then how they work with some of their common institutions. But I think we have some very clear paths that have been put forward here in the United States that we can start to move on. I think the time is now.
And April, can I encapsulate this just for?
And I know you are definitely in on HR 40. You're in the weeds on it, and I want to get to that. But before we go to that, and Aaron, I haven't forgotten about you. But before we go to that, I want to put some pieces of the puzzle together. HR 40, as Dr. Thompson said, was started by the late Congressman John Conyers. And when we talk about trying to heal, he brought it up every year. And now in 2021, it's here. I think back to when I first started in Washington 24 years ago, then President Bill Clinton had the race initiative to deal with the browning of America, the fact that the majority of America at a certain point in time would be brown people, not white America. It would be brown America that would be the majority. And we are now seeing a fight about the brown. I believe in my reporting, my factual reporting from civil rights leaders, congressional leaders, presidents, everybody on the spectrum, that this is the fight of power, of the racial fight over power, the power struggle between races. And when you talk about other countries, and you brought this up, Dr. Thompson, Germany, it is against the law. It's a crime to even post a swastika anywhere, correct? It's a crime. And yet we have all sorts of negative symbols that are allowed. And Nicole, I want you to get into this because you are in the weeds on HR 40 reparations. And what's on the table, a lot of people are talking about, oh, I want to get my personal payout. I'm a descendant of a slave. Others want it to be pushed throughout the community. And I've heard from Mary Frances Berry, who said the first people who should get the money are those descendants of Callie House and those slaves who did sign the documents for reparations as they were slaves. So I want you to talk to us about the significance of HR 40 for the United States and the parallels with what the world community is doing to recognize the wrongs of enslaving a group of people to build the nation and not give them any payment for it.
Yes. Thank you, April. And thank you, Dr. Thompson, for discussing so succinctly Congresswoman Lee's bill. I think it's important for people to understand that what we really have going on right now are what I like to call opportunities for reparative justice. And Congresswoman Lee's bill is a bill that tries to bring forth the fact that we need to have truth and reconciliation. And HR 40 is the bill that wants to establish a commission for us to just study, to simply study the issue of reparations. But both together, April, are about reparative justice. And that's where we have to start. How do we repair the harms that are a result of this 400 plus year history? Right. Now, when we talk about parallels to what's happening in other nations, that's actually one place where we're failing, April. As Dr. Thompson noted, we have other nations that are at least having the conversations. We cannot begin to address some of the particulars. And I don't want to get into the particulars. That would be a whole nother session, April, as you know. But we can't even begin to address what do reparations look like and who gets them and how are they distributed. We can't even get to that until we can have a conversation about, well, what is the history of racism and systemic racism in this country?
So let's ladies, and I want to recognize this too, that, and let's go back in history, because a lot of this is history. We have to recognize the history, what happened, what was said, and then apply it to today.
Yes.
So when General Sherman went to Lincoln and said, I want to give 40 acres to the slaves who were fighting, It was never ratified. There was, yeah, okay, we'll do it, but it was never ratified. So it is true that there was going to be not a gift, but a payment, 40 acres, a payment to Black slaves who fought on behalf of this country to save the country. There was a promise of a payment, but it was never ratified. So that's the beginning. There was a promise to pay and it was not given.
That's right.
The promise to pay and then to repair the wrong of how many hundreds of years how many generations did we build the wealth? We built wealth for philanthropists who built Yale and all these institutions that many of our people can't get into. Mm-hmm. So I'm with you. I am so with you. And when we tell the truth, and this is a whole nother thing, Nicole Hannah-Jones, God bless her for the 1619 Project. And she repaired her situation, which was beautiful. Black women here are standing here telling you the truth. And I'm telling you, if it was during the Trump years, we'd be in trouble. But we're telling you the truth about repairing wrongs. That's what reparations are about, to repair the wrong. And the question is, do we get lump sums? Because there is a situation right now in this nation where there's a wealth gap, an opportunity gap, an access to capital issue. Do we get a lump sum? Or do we infuse it in those communities that have the poor zip codes? I mean, where
all
are
of
we?
the above, April, all of the above.
Okay.
That's it. The way in which systemic racism has harmed the Black community. And when I say the Black community, I mean the descendants of slaves. I mean Black folks who are recent immigrants. Because if you are Black and you come to the United States, you're
lumped in with all of us.
Everyone is lumped together. And the impact of that systemic racism, that cancer, it affects you just as well. But we need to have a conversation about what does repair look like. It can be all those things. It can be what we see happening in Evanston, Illinois, April, and the kind of reparations they have put in place. So that's what the commission is going to do. It's going to enable the country to have a real conversation about what can this look like and what kind of repair is needed. Do we need better infrastructure in these Black communities? Do we need better schools, better healthcare systems? It can encompass all of those things. And I think everything needs to be on the table for that conversation.
So, Aaron, I've heard the nays on this. I've heard the yays, but I've heard the nays. And I'm sure you've heard them too. I have heard that if the United States embarks down this road after the study, because right now everybody say, oh, we're just studying. We don't need to study. We know what happened. We need to fix it. And that's one of the reasons why people are afraid to apologize for it, because they know as soon as you apologize, you got to go and correct the wrong right away. So whether this is a stalling to move forward or not, if indeed this does happen, people are saying it'll bankrupt the nation. Yeah, it'll bankrupt the nation. Other nations are doing this. How does the United States follow the plan so that we aren't bankrupt, to look at other nations who are trying to apply justice to repair the wrongs of slavery?
April, I actually wish that were a question that I could answer simply. I want to go back to the fact of the reason why we struggle with even having the conversation around reparative justice. And a lot of that is about ownership, right? I think it's about ownership, and it is about what that ownership does to the personal narratives that Americans hold, the damage it does to that personal narrative that they've told about what they stand for, as a citizen of this country, what they are supposed to stand for. It demolishes it. There's personal sacrifice for them involved. They are giving up something of that which they believed about themselves to be true. If we get to a place where they are willing to make that personal sacrifice, then we won't get to a place of healing, and nowhere near being able to have the conversation And just to share with you a personal story, I am the descendant of slaves that were owned by Jesuit priests and were owned by a woman that went on to found an order of nuns called the Society of the Holy Child Jesus. And so I don't know if you saw the story in the New York Times about the pledge that the Jesuit order has made. I believe it's a $100 billion pledge for reparations. Well, it's not reparations. They don't call it reparations, but it is an attempt to address the wrongs that were committed by the order in owning slaves. And these were not just Jesuits. You know, people, when people think about this, they think about the Georgetown 272, right? The Jesuits in the Maryland province that sold the 272 in order to have funds in order to start Georgetown University. Those weren't my people. My people were owned by French Jesuits that basically migrated to Louisiana. And when Grand Coteau, Louisiana, they started St. Charles College and owned my ancestors there. So, so this was something that, and it wasn't just Louisiana, it wasn't just Georgetown, it wasn't just Holy Cross in Kentucky, it wasn't just Washington University in St. Louis, it wasn't just Xavier University in Ohio. They had slaves everywhere. And so the way that they have decided to handle it is to set up a foundation, the Descendants and Truth Foundation. I'm trying to remember the exact name, but it's a foundation that the majority of the board are descendants of the formerly enslaved and Jesuits and corporations that also benefited in collaboration with the Jesuits from slavery. And so what to me that ultimately ended up doing, although I recognize the intent was they wanted to pledge some money. They'll have to work super hard to raise that money. But at the end of the day, the responsibility for correcting the wrong is still on those that were injured by slavery in the first place, because it's the foundation that is primarily run by Black people whose ancestors were formerly enslaved. So what I'm saying all of this for is because this conversation has been too much about money. And not enough about the disparities that exist where the money could help resolve the problems the most. And I think that is because there's a desire as a society to have silver bullets. And there is no silver bullet. This is no simple conversation. So do I know the answer to your question? No, I do not. Do I understand why it is so complicated to get to the answer to that question? Yes, I do. But I do realize that we're not going to start the conversation until there's enough of those in power that are willing to sacrifice the personal narrative that they've told themselves for so long about standing for truth, justice, and the American way, and that maybe someone in their lineage had responsibility for injuring Black people through the institution of slavery, and that they are willing to own responsibility for repairing the damage.
You know, I love the gems that you all are just dropping. This is such a great conversation. Ownership, people taking ownership and not running from what is awful and ugly. They don't want to, it happened. It wasn't me. It's over. We're fine. No, it's not fine, as you all have said. You know, there is a gap educationally, there is a gap financially, there is a gap in housing. Blacks are preyed upon in housing. I mean, the Black community still in this country still has the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category. Why? Because of the generational curse. No, it's not curse, because of the strategic move by power from slavery to Jim Crow to civil rights to today. That's what it is. And I'm 5 generations removed from the last known slave in my family who was sold on the auction block in Fayetteville, North Carolina. His name was Joseph Dollar Brown. He could not read or he could not write, but I get it and I understand. And it's painful. It is painful to sit in the White House understanding that I come from that and still no justice for people of color. With that said, I think about Shirley Chisholm. the first woman to run for president in 1970, the first Black woman to run for president in 1972, the first Black woman to run for president. She said, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And what she intrinsically understood and keenly knew, that if you're not at the table talking about it or moving it, it's not going to happen. We have Greg Meeks, Congressman Greg Meeks, who is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Powerful chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, dealing with issues like this on a global scale. Susan Rice, who used to be a U.S. ambassador, used to be at the State Department, who used to be National Security Advisor. Why are Black people not in the space like we are in other areas? Because we have a lot to gain and to lose. And this is like a moving space. Ladies, Dr. Thompson, come on, you got something to say.
I was actually going to try first this go around, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead. Come on,
chiming in. Okay, because I had some thoughts on this, right? So, this, to me, this is where, when we start talking about systemic racism or institutional racism, and how ideas of white superiority are really a part of everyday thinking. It is really the default. And I'm thinking specifically of myself at the United States Agency for International Development. That's a part of the national security apparatus, right? And so thinking how, when white superiority is the default, then the upper echelons of our organizations, specifically from the Foreign Service perspective, are largely as Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley will say, pale, male, and Yale, right? And so the impact is that when you have your default, the bar is or the standard really is white superiority and pale, male, and Yale, then that impacts who is in the room. It impacts where the room is and the decisions that are made while in the room, right? And so the diversity issues that I think about, because these are the issues that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day, right? As interim diversity, equity, inclusion coordinator at USAID, the diversity issues that we have in our organizations, our national security organizations, are in large part a result of institutional racism and the lack of diversity of which I just spoke. And these types of decisions are what and the influence of white superiority is what results in having only with Black Foreign Service officers primarily being assigned to posts in Africa. It's what results in Black ambassadors only able to become ambassadors in sub-Saharan countries or
Caribbean nations.
Or what affects in the GAO report for USAID on diversity, the statistically significant odds of promotion in the civil service that were 31 to 41% lower for racial or ethnic minorities than for whites. So, and then that's at the early to mid-career. So these are examples of what happens when there's a lack of diverse perspectives and when we allow systemic racism or institutional racism to persist.
Dr. Thompson, Congresswoman Lee said that when Americans of color don't see their priorities acknowledged, they feel alienated by their own government. When they see fewer opportunities to shape foreign policy, they're less likely to engage in shaping foreign policy and in politics generally. What specific issues do you believe will be highlighted and addressed with increased diversity in the foreign policy sphere?
So I'll say a few things on that. So one, I did also want to add to your list Senator Bob Menendez, who is also chairing the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at this point. And so it's actually very important that you're noting that we have both in the House and Senate and in charge of the foreign affairs budget at this point, people of color. And that's not to actually even take anything away from Chris Coons from Delaware, who is also someone I think who's been very supportive and instrumental of diversity issues in international affairs. But I'll say
he's been very Senator Coons, Chris Coons has been very instrumental in working with Africa as well. Exactly. I know that. Yes.
Exactly. And so I kind of want to maybe lay out three issues here. So one, that has also meant more diverse staffing. So the commission I'm from, Congressman Elsie Hastings, who unfortunately passed earlier this year, was the first African-American chairman of the Helsinki Commission. He then appointed the first African-American chief of staff to the Helsinki Commission. And I also had the pleasure of serving as acting chief of staff for him for a while as well. We have Sophia Lafarge, who's Congressman Meek's staff director. So there are a number of people, I would say staff, that are also able to not only, I think, occupy these spaces, but then also have the ability to help shape policy. And one of the things that we did at the commission under Chairman Hastings' leadership with Alex Johnson and myself was to start to look at this idea of inclusive policymaking as a way of us actually embracing the democratic values that we say our nations subscribe to. And not only here in the United States, but also our Western allies that also are democracies as well. And so what that actually led to were annual conferences, Young Leaders Program, and support for diverse civil society, where we've had members of parliament that are of African descent, of the Roma population, so Europe's largest minority, Muslim, people with disabilities, et cetera, but all coming together to really talk about what's happening is that when we don't have this diversity in our legislatures and our policymaking and decision-making positions, we are actually creating policies that do not fit the populations that are in our democracies. And not only is that not necessarily walking our talk, it also becomes waste because you then have to go back and fix policies. And those are actually a lot of the conversations we're having now. We're trying to fix policies that did not include the populations that are currently in our democracies right now. That's what a lot of these conversations really are about. It's like, oops, we didn't include you. And that has to do with healthcare, that has to do with housing, et cetera. And I think some people would say it wasn't an oops, it was an on purpose. But the reality is we're still having to go back and now retrofit policies. And in that, when there's that struggle, we have people that are saying, you know what, this democracy really isn't working for us. And that's not only here. Pew did a study last year where they were finding young people in not only our nation, but in 5 different democracies in Europe, were just saying they didn't believe democracy was working for them. They weren't seeing the same returns. And so when you're not seeing the returns, you start looking for other solutions. And so I think, walking our talk is not only important, but it really is going to determine the future of our nation. And then the only other thing I will say is when we're not utilizing diverse populations in not only international affairs and other positions, we're not using our strategic advantage. So we're not using our multilingual talent. We're not using people that are culturally competent and that would know how to go in and out of places like Haiti or China or others to get the best trade deal or to try to help with infrastructure development. We're really not utilizing the strategic advantage. And so it is not, just about political correctness or those things. It is really about us, saying we are going to actually embody the values that we say we espouse.
Nicole?
April, I agree with everything my fellow panelists said, but I just want to add this caveat that it's also about centering issues that are of concern to diverse communities within the human rights spectrum. When I came to Human Rights Watch and became the head of the US program, the first thing I told my team is that our work is going to be focused on racial justice. And this is before, April, we had a pandemic that showed the racial and economic disparities. This was before we had the killing of George Floyd, the killing of Breonna Taylor, when everyone all of a sudden realized, like a deer caught in headlights, like, oh my goodness, we have to really deal with this race thing.
Ahmaud Arbery was the first one.
That litany, April, that list. And so it's also about making sure that we are requiring the human rights community to center these issues of importance, because people want to see the issues that are concerned to their communities be on the agenda.
That's right.
So if you want that diversity of voices and faces around the table, they also have to feel that the issues that are concerned to their communities are going to be important. And one thing, April, that I have to note that has just recently happened is the UN Human Rights Council recently adopted a resolution on systemic racism. That was a huge, huge victory and a huge statement because it said that these issues around race and racial justice have to be at the pinnacle of what we are focusing on as a human rights community. So that has to be a part of it too, not just are the right faces around the table, but are the right issues on the table.
So, Nicole, you just hit something. And as you and all the panelists talked about earlier, that human rights and civil rights are basically the same thing. And now you're saying that the UN has taken up this issue. Will the United States be on the agenda with its issues of civil rights / human rights problems that have been plaguing this nation? Will the UN take this up as it relates to the United States as they are in New York City?
Well, April, I want to say that many of us pushed very hard, and yes, there were some trepidation, but yes, the U.S. is going to have the mirror turned on itself as part of these conversations. And I keep telling people this is not going to be easy. It's not pretty. It's not always nice, but these are the conversations that we have to have. This is the kind of microscope we have to put on ourselves as a nation. If we ever think we are going to even begin to scratch the surface of resolving some of these problems. And I think the fact that the US was around the table on this says something and says that we are starting to move in the right direction on the global stage around systemic racism.
And this isn't just myth or conjecture talking about human rights and civil rights. I mean, let's just go to the issue of voting rights in the little bit of time we have left in the United States. Look at what's happening in Haiti. We don't know how their elections process is going to happen with the gangs, et cetera. But here in the United States, we're supposed to be the democracy that had the 1965 Voting Rights Act passed into law, and that's been knocked. And now the Biden administration national security advisor answered a question that I asked in the White House briefing. I said, is the volatility of, or the instability of voting rights a national security issue? He said, yes. He said, yes, because the United States is the shining symbol of democracy. So now we are having the mirror turned on us when it comes to human rights / civil rights. Our voting rights instability is a national security issue. Ladies, in this synopsis of a synopsis moment, give us some solutions to move ahead. With all these negatives, there's still hope. I want you to give us a synopsis of a synopsis for the move forward, please. And I want to start with you, Erin.
I wish I had the ready solutions. I think that what we have been talking about during this conversation about the diversity of the voices that are in the room has been elevating diversity of voices to the table is definitely one where we need to invest time and effort, and how we do that in policy making positions, both on the Hill as well as policy making positions throughout the executive branch of the federal government. That's one. Two, and when I think about the diversity within the executive branch, how we hire, recruit, and retain those, especially at the more senior levels of the organization and the policy making functions within the organization, that is a way that we can start moving in the right direction. Three, when we have those two things in place, then we are able to help in setting the agenda, right? And being able to have voices around the table in order to set the agenda. So those are the three things that come to mind for me insofar as how we start to move in the right direction. But I also want to state that disappointment is the gap between expectations and reality. And so we definitely need to make sure that we stay focused on what and understand what our reality is, and keep our expectations measured as we make slow progress along on this journey. That's
Nicole?
April, as you said earlier, I cheated a little and got to some of the solutions earlier in the conversation.
You sure did.
So I won't repeat those, and I agree with what Aaron just added. The one thing I would say is this, that I also charge our NGO organizations because there are a lot of organizations that have traditionally worked on civil rights. There are a lot that have traditionally worked on what they consider to be human rights. I want to see more of a coming together across the board within that community to show that these issues are inextricably linked and that they have to be treated as such, and that we have to be working more in unison to put these issues on the agenda. We can't just look to our government leaders to do that. We have to be doing that as a community of leaders as well. I think that, on top of what Aaron said, has to be a part and parcel of how we move forward.
Dr. Thompson?
I'm going to see how much I can say in like 1 minute. So political participation is voting, but honestly, there's also policy making at different levels. So we have domestic, regional, and global, and we actually need people that are participating in that policy making at all of those different levels. And so that includes some of the jobs that Aaron has talked about in places such as USAID, our State Department, et cetera. There are some fabulous programs that actually pay for people to be able to have their degrees paid for and enter those agencies, such as the Rango program, the Payne program, and the Pickering, all of which Chairwoman Barbara Lee has supported. And then I would just say, to Nicole's point, one of the conversations we've been having is also having the private sector engaged in these conversations with governments and civil society, but with this insurance that civil society is always at the table, in part because they are sometimes left out. And then the last piece, our commission actually worked really closely with our State Department to make sure there were international election observers at our last election. And I encourage everyone to go to the OSCE's website, where it is reported a number of issues that the international community is seeing with our own elections here at home, and then also what the United States is doing to try to address some of those issues, with the hope that in 2 years and in 4 years, we will be in a much better place.
This has been such an informative panel discussion. Ladies first, we had it. But, it is so important that we understand that we are a part of the solution, not just here in this country that's still dealing with old issues, but we're part of the solution, just not just here, but globally. And it takes everyone. And I love the fact that there are Black women at the table. And I just think about that. Again, I said it earlier, a couple of years ago, we were vilified for our smarts, for being able to enter the discussion and make demands of what we want. But it's a different day, and we won't go backwards. But there is a solution. As we're talking about solutions, there is one solution I want to throw out. The Biden administration, in July of 2021, the State Department formally invited the United Nations Racism and Human Rights envoys to visit the United States amid a contentious ongoing domestic debate over the treatment of minorities in America. Nicole, there you have it. One piece of a large puzzle that it's going to take a while to fix, but we had a wonderful discussion with these women talking about foreign policy, democratization of the U.S. foreign policy, how diversity can shape U.S. engagement throughout the world. And I want to thank each of our panelists today. I want to thank Dr. Thompson. I want to thank Aaron. I want to thank Nicole for being with us. And I want to thank you for tuning in. You can make a difference. Remember, you are a part of that equation our founding fathers put in place. And they may not have thought that we were going to be part of it, but we are here. We are part of that We the People solution. Remember, we the people are still forming a more perfect union. It's not perfect yet. We're still forming it. Thank you. And thank you, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for inviting us and having us for this major discussion on domestic policy as it relates to us, people of color in this nation and diversity. Take care. Bye. Peace out.